Okie dokie. So let me get this out the way. I'm recording this just kind of in my hiatus here. But I kind of just want to do this unvarnished without being influenced by YouTube. But I think it's important to realize the difference between political orientations. More than just left versus right, but your paleo-conservative versus neoconservative versus your centrist, or maybe even your neo-lib versus your Marxist-Leninist, or any of these other types of groups. It's very challenging to understand the depths of those ideologies unless you're directly part of them. And I think that it gets very difficult, and I haven't been the best at explaining these things because these are very complex beliefs that they have. And ultimately these wax and wane, these political ideologies, they shift, they set up narratives that may evolve through time. And they'll say, we support this for now, but we don't want, this stuff later on, I think it's interesting too. I'm going to mention this again. I'm going to just mention him here, screw it. But when Kevin Castley, and along with that Spooky Nuki guy, and they were saying, we just want a economic war with China. We don't want racism. All that ugly nationalism is so bad. That racism is so bad, and it's awful what happened to those folks that got beat up in California and whatnot. But we just want an economic war. We don't want to ban Chinese from entering colleges and stuff like that. And I'm like, bro, you're not going to talk about yellow. They don't talk about yellow peril. They don't want to talk about when the United States wants to go to war with. It's like when the United States went to war with the Axis powers, if we want to look at it in a simplistic way like that. But more specifically, when we went to war with the Japanese in 1941 in the Japanese Empire. Once again, I'm sorry, I always say once again, but it's like you see the racism that was present. The bucktooth, Japanese Tojo sort of, oh yes, we're going to get you now. You die, Joe. And everything else like that, And of course, we're gonna beat the Japs, the Nips, whatever word you want to, yeah. This is the same thing that led to the imprisonment and the putting, we'll just say concentration camps. We use internment camps, but places like Manzanar to put Japanese Americans into both Nisei and Issei. Nisei were the newer generation, some of which joined the Nisei regiment that fought in Italy. That's where you get that congressman. Anyway, that's a whole different story. But it's the same thing when we went to war with Vietnam. All the racism came about, didn't it? The whole, the zipper heads, the gooks, and everything else like that. And so to me, like I say, this is a continuation of that sort of thing where it's like, but, some people will say, it's like the outright fascist, if you want to use that term, or the outright National Socialist or the outright paleocon will be like, well, racism, is going to happen. So what? We don't like them, But the neocon does not want to see this racism. They say, we're just simply helping these people. We're against the CCP. We're not against the people. We're not, it's like we support Hong Kong. We support the people that agree with us. We're just against the CCP. Imagine if in World War II, and I'm sure that there were elements of this where, where people will say, oh, well, we're just fighting the Nazi Party. We're not fighting all of Germany. Now, to be fair, Stalin did in his speech, his victory speech, against, by saying, hey, victory over Germany. But we are not against the German people and everything else. This is very much implied. And of course, like I say, people give me examples of Stalin, where back during the revolution, Germans were still, it's like, why don't you just go in? It's like they were waiting in a movie theater, I think. I'm sorry, I get a little excited and I just cut to the chase, so excuse me, I'm a little spurgy. But, they'll go in, and, they're going to go in and seeing a movie. It was Stalin and this other anarchist, I can't think of which name. You can gladly write in the comments, because I'm sure that my audience knows better. But they were waiting for this, they were in waiting line for a movie to get a ticket. And they're like, people are just walking in, and Stalin said, well, why don't you just go in? And the guy's like, no, we're going to wait for a ticket. So this is very much, it kind of speaks to that sort of idea. I'm just saying that as an off topic. But he didn't hate the German people. Once again, once the German Democratic Republic was established, I know people will say, oh, they were just puppets and all that. But the thing is, they still held on to a lot of Germanic, and more specifically Prussian, ideals for their military. And they still had ex-Wehrmacht generals who did start that. There were plenty of ex-SS folks who were in the bureaucracy. So, anyway, but I'm trying to explain some of the differences here. The thing is that, the German Democratic Republic did hold on to some things that were Germanic. And I think that you can have a political ideology, and you can say you're an anarchist or whatever the case may be, but there's a difference between the LARPers who think that they're going to change everything, and the more pragmatic folks who say, okay, let's try to, fuse what we have now and we're going to aim towards that, I think people like Bo the Fifth Column, as much as I disagree with him, are on that path. Now, I spoke a little bit about differences here in terms of ideology. Like I said, this is spurgy, but hopefully you can dig through this and find the point, is that political ideologies are messy. And they'll support various folks, or they will say, oh yes, it's great for this particular person, not because they may identify with that person, but because they think it will lead them to their goal. Like I say, once again, at least in my opinion, or my assumption anyway, is that neoconservatives want to have American hegemony because, the Enlightenment and everything else is so much better. It's a more free country, I guess. I still don't get that type of thing, but it's like, and thinking about it though, is that you could have more of a pan-Arabist sort of idea to say, we don't hate Islam, but maybe we can go back to a different time when, a more enlightened system than we have now. Because the thing is that, ultimately the Western ideas come from Greece, or they come from, Rome, or whatever the case may be. But it's like, look, to ignore the fact that, and maybe I'm sounding a bit more pro-black or whichever, but, there were, I'm going to just use Nas's line, but there were, Africa as an empire called Kush and everything else, that they had their own advanced societies. It's the same thing with China. They had their own advanced societies. The Western Asia, or the Middle East as we call them, they had their own advanced societies as well. So to simply say, oh, well, we need Americanism, no. I think that they could, why don't they relate back to their own older culture than having this American pause system? And that's where, like I say, that's not necessarily, some Paleocons may think that that's true to a point, that we shouldn't be involved in those wars. Ultimately, it's just, maybe I hold this view somewhat, but it's like, ultimately, we should just non-interventionist. We need to stay out of that and let Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and all these nations solve their own issues without us being involved. But of course, we have this paranoia, from people like Kevin Castley, who think that China is going to invade the U.S. in 10 years or something once they build up their force. No. The world doesn't work that way anymore. The world doesn't work by just invasions and everything else. With financial capital, with the power of people like, with the power of the IMF, you don't need to have. This is why people use neo-imperialism. China does not need to invade these African nations. They can say, hey, we can build roads for you. We can build, infrastructure. We can have, we can bring our trucks in and everything else. And we can, have a presence in some terms, but it's like they don't have to invade, This isn't the 19th century, We don't have to continue to fight the Thuggee, which is where the original word thug came from. The British, the Thuggee would normally just strangle folks and, steal their stuff. And it was the British that were fighting the Thuggee. But anyway, that's a whole other story. I'm just saying is that, I guess I hold the view that these countries can help their own issues. And I think that why does the United States feel the need to get involved with that? That American hegemony is such a great thing. It's like, no, it isn't. And, they'll make excuses. People like Kevin Castlin, once again, they will give their excuses by saying, oh, well, if we just allowed for, if we just, 20-year nation building, if we just did that in Afghanistan, then no, it's not that easy. Because number one, under this system, you're going to go through 5 different presidents in that 20 years, under the present system that we are under, or potentially 2 other, maybe 2 other presidents, maybe 3, who knows? It all depends, right? But it's nonsense to me to see this sort of stuff. And to see and hear this sort of nonsense that we're going to try to hold on to this idea that it's like, oh well, the alt-right said those things about the West, but we support the real West, and it's just such nonsense to me. It's just I know that this is more of a dabbing on him because it still bugs the hell out of me. It does, but you see that these different ideologies, it's like people will invade Iraq for whatever reason. It's just like, people that may consider themselves, Iraqi, but they've liberated, Iraq from, Saddam Hussein or, Russia, It's like, I'm sure that, there are monarchist folks who support Putin for right now, but they ultimately want the Tsar to come back. Of course, it's literally impossible, but still. And you get these weird mixes of ideologies, like that one video that y'all showed me about that anarcho-monarchist guy or something like that. This dude's literally grooming somebody, bro. It's just like, I don't know. I know that this didn't make much sense. Holy crap. I'm looking at the timer now. I'm going on for 13 and a half minutes of just pure babble, but it's okay. This is why y'all listen, right? Anyway, this is such garbage to me. I'm just gonna say it. It is garbage. These political ideologies that that people hang on to because they've read some books. It's just like, oh yeah, well, to me is that pragmatism comes first, and that you can talk about what you can do as a political ideology, that, well, no borders and all that type of thing, being like an anarchist, but yeah, it's very messy, isn't it? And it just goes to show you that this is why very few people stay in politics in general, because politics is for the nerdy folks who couldn't get laid in high school, basically. But they got laid probably in their 20s or 30s because they were good at, finding some other spurg who was willing to sleep with them, I don't know. It's just so ridiculous, with this politics nonsense. That's why I want to take a break from it. Because it's such BS. It's such feijoa that goes on with it. But it is important to ultimately try to find the difference between the various types of conservatism. And I know that there's more than just neoconservatism versus paleoconservatism, or whichever. I know. Of course, people like Vosh will just be like, well, conservatives are all bad and they all have bad arguments. But it's like, I guess we have to discover what the difference is between them somehow. I don't even know. You know what? I'm going to leave this up as it is. I hope y'all enjoy the Teddy Roosevelt there. I want to do something a little bit different. And I know Teddy Roosevelt would probably be considered more of I'm going to say paleocon in some ways. I mean, yeah, he was I guess you could say loosely maybe a neocon through, charging up San Juan Hill. And I know that that's usually, taken out of context, but, and then he became more of a paleocon and wanted to preserve the environment. He was influenced by John Muir. So I don't know. Like I say, it goes to show how people change throughout time. Even Jean Kirkpatrick, the lady that influenced neoconservatism, will say, yeah, well, but we need to support Argentina over the British. And it's just like, it's just such ridiculousness, Anyway, I have ranted for about 16 minutes on stuff. I hope y'all enjoy this. It'll give you something to listen to while you're washing the dishes, or you're, I don't know, just sitting there, whatever, I don't know. Whatever it is you do, it's none of my business ultimately, but as long as you enjoy it and listen to this and say, that Spurgy guy has a point, and it wasn't a complete waste of my time. That's all I care about. Was it a complete waste of your time? I hope not. If so, then just say, hey, can you make shorter videos, or can you make more focused stuff instead of this rambly nonsense that you seem to put out? If so, then you can type that in the comments. That's perfectly okay. Anyway, I'm just a little bit loose and a little bit, just loopy. So I hope you'll enjoy that. See you later. Goodbye.